How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
My fellow Americans, welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. Glad to have you with me across the United States of America. The phone number is 877-973-7425. If you'd like to be on the program, I must talk about science. You know, I like science. Science is not fact. Science is theory and hypothesis and testing, and over time it can change, and over time some can become fact. Math is fact. This weird idea that you could have some sort of subjective math, this racialized math component that some people have in Common Core math and the garbage. In fact, my daughter in college went to a school that taught real math, and she was horrified. She sent my wife and me a picture the other day of some kid who had subtracted something, and the subtraction took up like most of the page, as opposed to my kids. It took up three lines. It was the top number, the bottom number, and then the result. And this other kid, using Common Core math, just messed the whole thing up. And then you've got the racialized math. And now, you know, racialized math is if all the kids in the word problem have white names, the black kid might not want to get the math question right. Believe it or not, that's actually a thing, according to the wokes. They just politicize everything. Well, there's a story in the New York Times. The headline, "We are watching a scientific superpower destroy itself." And it is by Stephen Greenblatt. Ironically, they don't say Dr. Stephen Greenblatt, just Mr. Greenblatt is a professor of the humanities at Harvard. And I thought, wait a second. So we have a man purporting to write about the scientific superpower destroyed itself, and he's not even a scientist. He's the John Cogan University Professor of the Humanities. Let me read you the Harvard website. He's got a BA from Yale, a Master's of Philosophy from Cambridge, a PhD from Yale. His interests are Shakespeare, early modern literature and culture, literature of travel and exploration, religion and literature, literature and anthropology, and literary and cultural theory. His selected works, Tyrant, Shakespeare on Politics, The Rise and Fall of Adam and Eve, The Swerve, How the World Became Modern, Shakespeare's Freedom, Cultural Mobility, Hamlet in Purgatory, the Norton Anthology of English Literature, the general editor of that, Practicing New Historicism with Catherine Gallagher, the general editor of the Norton Shakespeare Anthology, the editor of the New World Encounters, author of Marvelous Possessions, Learning to Curse, Shakespearean Negotiations, Renaissance Self-Fashioning, Second Chances, Shakespeare and Freud, Dark Renaissance, The Dangerous Times and Fatal Genius of Shakespeare's Greatest Rival. So he's a Shakespeare expert, and yet somehow he's the guy the New York Times has turned to discuss a scientific superpower destroying itself. The Trump administration's assault on America's universities by cutting billions of dollars of federal support for scientific and medical research has called up from somewhere deep in my memory the phrase duck and cover. These were the words drilled into American children in the 1950s. We heard them on television, where they accompanied a cartoon about a wise turtle named Bert who withdrew from his shell at any sign of danger. In class, when our teachers gave the order, we were instructed to follow Bert's example by diving under our desks and covering our necks. Those actions were meant to protect us from the nuclear attack that could come, we were told, at any time. Though even in elementary school, most of us intuited that there was something futile in these attempts to shield ourselves from destruction, we dutifully went through the motions. How else could we deal with the anxiety caused by the menace? The anxiety greatly increased in October 1957 when Americans learned of the Soviet Union's successful launch of the world's first satellite, Sputnik 1. The vivid evidence of the technological superiority and rocketry of our Cold War enemy provoked a remarkably rapid response. In 1958, by bipartisan vote, Congress passed and President Eisenhower signed the National Defense Education Act, one of the most consequential federal interventions in education in the nation's history. Together with the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health, it made America into the world's undisputed leader in science and technology. Nearly 70 years later, that leadership is in peril. According to the latest annual Nature Index, which tracks research institutions by their contributions to leading science journals, the single remaining U.S. institution among the top 10 is Harvard, in second place, far behind the Chinese Academy of Sciences. The others are the University of Science and Technology of China, Zhejiang University, Peking University, the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences, Tsinghua University, Nanjing University, Germany's Max Planck Society, and Shanghai Jiao Tong University. And on it goes, this expert in Shakespeare lamenting our decline in science. I want to say a couple things here. One, I actually agree with him. You know, I'm a conservative. I'm not a libertarian. I do think there's a role for government to some degree in our lives, though very restrained and mostly to protect us from government. But let's take my wife's cancer as an example, because it really is a perfect example here. If the free market were to research cancer, my wife's cancer is one the free market would not research because it is very difficult to understand and process. Not a lot of people get it. It's not where you get the most bang for the buck. It required federal research and academic research to come up with a cure for my wife's cancer. My wife has a cure. Well, has a medicine she can take that doesn't cure it but keeps the cancer from spreading. It is made by Big Pharma, the evil Big Pharma, keeping my wife alive. But AstraZeneca, which makes the medicine, based the development of the medicine based on governmental and academic research that the private sector didn't fund because the private sector couldn't see a way to make money off the research. It was only later that the private sector did. I have concerns. I do have concerns about cutting government funding for this research. My wife is a living example of the need for this academic and government-funded research to improve the lives of people that can then be divested from the government towards the private sector, working together with the public sector to find cures, public-private partnerships. It works. It does. It's good. I mentioned last week that I interviewed an 11-year-old. The 11-year-old is cured of sickle cell anemia through stem cell transplant. The studies in stem cells came from a government academic research partnership, not from Big Pharma, but then Big Pharma got involved and helped produce the medicines that help stabilize the stem cell transplants and make it all possible. Working hand in glove, they were able to do it. I do have concerns. I do have concerns about the government. I do have concerns about not being able to fund this stuff. And I do have concerns about our level of academic public-private partnerships related to the development of science. I do. But you know what I also have concerned about? I also have concerns about the number of American scientific publications that didn't want to publish scientific material unless it was diverse enough. I have real concerns about the number of scientific papers that have been published that have been debunked that went all in on trying to tell us the life cycle of lesbian turtles. I have a lot of concern about the mass exodus of science from science and the mass entrance of progressive politics into science. And what I find troubling is that the people who wring their hands about the Trump administration, and even RFK, who I'm on record, I really don't like the guy. I think he's bad news. But I have a real hard time with a lot of the critics on the left attacking all this stuff who cannot, for the life of them, point out that it was the politicization of progressive political agendas in science that opened the door for the response from the right. If you're not willing to acknowledge that having the pagan Satanist at the CDC who couldn't tell gay men to stop having sex for 2 weeks to stop monkeypox, I think you're irrelevant to the conversation. I really do. If you can't understand that devoting your scientific publications to diversity, equity, and inclusion as opposed to actual science, you got problems. The scientific community has discredited its own science by becoming so involved in woke politics. That's just the reality. You may not like it, but it's true. And until academics like Stephen Greenblatt and others are willing to recognize and acknowledge that the scientific community and the academic community tied to the science community have hurt themselves by embracing progressive political theory over actual raw science, you're going to have problems. You've discredited yourselves, and you're not going to be able to fix the problems. Yes, I'm really concerned about China advancing, but you know why China is advancing in the scientific realm? Because China has not bothered to bog itself down into the woke, politically correct actions and agendas of the American academic left and many in the scientific community. Unless you're willing to recognize that the American scientific and academic community have degraded themselves, you're not going to be able to solve the problem, and blaming Donald Trump is just a way of scapegoating your own problems. Public-private partnerships in science, particularly science that shows the potential for benefit but not the immediacy of profit, are actually good things. Not a libertarian. The idea that if we just let the private sector handle all the research, that everybody will benefit, I don't actually think it's true, because the profit motive does suggest to me that they would leave on the floor some theories that do not show enough potential for a rate of return to be worth studying, and oftentimes that's where the cures are. And for those of you who say, well, then, but that's where the cures are, that's where they would do it. I want a bird in hand versus two in the bush. I think you're mistaken. I see the benefits in my wife's life of public-private partnerships when it comes to cancer research from the federal government and academic institutions. I see the benefit. My wife lives after being given 2 years to live. But for the life of me, I just can't understand the people who can't understand that when you're polluting your politics into the science, you're not doing science anymore. When the scientific community can no longer tell us what a man and a woman is because the politically progressive agenda of the trans community has polluted science. Heard the story last night of a woman who is pregnant and has some health issues but identifies as a man and is berating people for calling her a her while they're trying to help save her and the life of her child. And she's more concerned about getting the pronouns right. And that sort of stuff invades the scientific community and breaks down their thinking. They start blacklisting scientists who aren't down with their politically progressive agenda. They've done it to themselves. I have lots of concerns about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I've stated them regularly. But if you on the left cannot understand that your own actions contributed to this, the politicization during COVID, the calling people conspiracy theorists who actually just thought differently about the situation and turned out to be right, the politicization of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the scientific realm, atoms are neither black nor white, nor should you treat them as such. The idea that we got to elevate diverse voices over the best voices. all of these things hurt the scientific community and the academic community well before Donald Trump came onto the scene. And that they cannot acknowledge it suggests they are incapable, once Donald Trump leaves, of fixing the problem. And we will continue to fall further and further behind because they have decided that politics trumps science. Them on the left, not Trump. The people on the left did that. Can we talk about quality for just a minute? Because I can tell you, as I'm updating some furniture in my house that's lasted a very long time, it pains me to see all the cheapy disposable furniture where you're buying cheap stuff that you replace more often. You're actually losing money. It's like people who go out and they buy very cheap sheets, but at the same time, there are people who think they've got to throw thousands of dollars at bed sheets. I actually know someone who spent $1,500 on sheets. My Bull and Branch sheets, they've lasted longer than that guy's sheets, and they're super soft now. They're not the highest thread count, no, but they're organic cotton, and they're long-lasting, and they get softer over time. Feel the difference an extraordinary night's sleep makes with Bull and Branch. Get 15% off plus free shipping on your first set of sheets at bullandbranch.com/Eric. That's Bull and Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/Eric, ERICK. Save 15%, unlock free shipping, exclusions apply. Welcome back. It is Eric Erickson here. Let's hop to the phones. Bob on this science topic. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
I'm fine, Eric. Thank you for listening to my thoughts. I heard you talking about this gentleman, the humanities fellow who talked about the death of science. I would contend that the fundamental issue is one of worldview. Atheists are capable of studying science because they believe there's such a thing as absolute truth. The problem is not Christians. We started science, and it flourished under our understanding of absolute truth, which is even richer than the atheists, obviously. But the problem is postmodernism, which is the legitimate offspring of atheism, and that's what's killing science. That's why the atheistic countries can still do decent science, even though they have no reason for it and they have no moral basis for doing it.
Look, I think that's a strong point. The atheist societies trying to understand the way the world works, and for those of you who are laughing at Bob here, he's telling the truth that it was actually a Christians who wanted to try to better understand God and the rules of the natural order that actually really dived into science. And I mean, before them, they based off the Greek philosophers and Aristotle. A lot of revisionist history these days trying to claim that Christians rejected it, and a lot of people going after the Catholic Church, for example, for Galileo, who they really weren't actually punishing Galileo for claiming the world revolved around the sun, which it did, and yet that's where the historic revisionism is. But in the postmodern world, part of the problem, to Bob's point, is for those of you who don't understand postmodernism elevates emotions over reason. That's why people say things like I feel instead of I think, and my truth instead of the truth, because they're elevating their feelings over everything else. And that trickles into the scientific community as well. And emotionalism trumps raw reason, and you need reason to get science. In fact, if you go to ericforhillsdale.com, you can take one of their classes on scientific reasoning for free with a great professor at Hillsdale College. Every lecture's 30 minutes. They're videotaped. And then once it's done, you can take more classes, but each class depends on the episode. So, for example, they've got a great class on the Federalist Papers right now, and I think there are 12 classes. And again, it's 30 minutes each. Each lecture 30 minutes. So you come away learning a lot. But they've got classes on science generally, chemistry, math, basic economics, philosophy, theology, politics, history, literature. You can pick whichever one you want to take, and you do it for free. It's Eric, ERICK, ericforhillsdale.com. You sign up today with Hillsdale College and commit to learning. There's a topic surely that you are interested in. Surely there's a topic you're interested in. You can find out so much more about it than you already know with Hillsdale College's great faculty. All you do is go to ericforhillsdale.com. Sign up today. Eric, ERICK, ericforhillsdale.com. Some breaking news as we go to break. The Prime Minister of France resigning, bringing down that government because Emmanuel Macron more and more out of touch. We'll be right back. In business, they say you can have better, cheaper, or faster, but you can only pick two. What if you could have all three at the same time? That's exactly what Cohere, Thomson Reuters, and Specialized Bikes have since they've upgraded to the next generation of the cloud. Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. OCI is the blazing fast platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs, where you can run any workload in a high availability, consistently high performance environment and spend less than you would with other clouds. How's it faster? OCI's block storage gives you more operations per second. Cheaper? OCI costs up to 50% less for compute, 70% less for storage, and 80% less for networking. Better? In test after test, OCI customers report lower latency and higher bandwidth versus other clouds. This is the cloud built for AI and for all your biggest workloads. Right now, with zero commitment, try OCI for free. Head to oracle.com/Erickson, ERICKSON. That's oracle.com/Erickson. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Let's go out to Oklahoma and take a call from Grant waiting patiently. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Hey, Mr. Erickson, great to get on your show. I think you got one of the most insightful shows on the air, lots of good topics. I'm going to get straight to the point. We've heard a lot of talk about the Federal Reserve and central banking, and I understand that central banking is there so that we can avoid ups and downs in the economy. But my concern about the Federal Reserve is we are a fiat currency. We're no longer backed by silver or gold. And during the Nixon-Kissinger administration, Kissinger set up the petrodollar. Well, we're no longer backed by the petrodollar either. So I'm just curious, what's the short-term and long-term goal of the Fed since we have a paper currency, which has always historically been doomed to fail?
Well, okay, that's a great point. Always doomed to fail. Here's how it has been restructured over time is that pretty much every major market economy's currency is also a fiat currency now. So you can't, essentially the entire global economy repackaged so that if everybody's currency is based on paper, then no currency can fail because they all fail. And it's a house of cards, yes, but it's also a house of cards that's actually worked pretty good. In the past, our currency was backed by gold or by silver. During World War II, they wanted to move away from that. After World War II, and as they restructured economies around the world, essentially everybody got together and said, all right, the dollar is going to be the starting point, and we're gonna value currencies around the world based on where the dollar is. The dollar is the reserve currency. It's the strongest economy in the world, and it has been. Now, what's happening is that in the past, we would have a lot of nations that weren't even friendly to the United States. The Soviet Union, for example, would conduct global trade still in the dollar because the dollar was the most easily convertible currency on the planet. Have you seen the price of gold lately? Have you seen it? Gold has skyrocketed. Gold in the past, and I'm not an expert here, but I've read enough, talked to enough people. Gold has skyrocketed, not because it's a hedge against inflation. Inflation is going down. Gold is skyrocketing because the BRIC nations are working very hard to detach global currency trades from the dollar. They want to trade in gold. And this gets to something my caller here is talking about, that when all these countries start trading in gold again, you're detaching all the paper currency valuations from propping each other up. It's one reason, by the way, there is some economic theory within the Trump administration that the tariffs are actually stabilizing the dollar, and that the tariffs are useful in that regard in replacement for the reserve currency and trading that we're capturing trade values through tariffs. Now, that's a very esoteric theory, and it's very much the right-wing equivalent of modern monetary theory, as best I can tell. Modern monetary theory being the theory that the Biden administration deployed to essentially say you can print money on end forever and not get inflation as long as you tax the wealthy. And of course, you know what the left says. The left says, well, we didn't actually tax the wealthy. That's why we got inflation, which is kind of nonsense. I honestly, I'll tell you what I think. I find the whole argument over gold currency and fiat currency to be very esoteric and boring. And there's a certain segment of the population that really galvanizes to it. And my theory is we got what we got. And if you want to change it, change it. But you're probably not going to be able to change it. Because the value of our Federal Reserve System, though I honest to God believe it's an unconstitutional structure, I also believe the Supreme Court is not going to throw it out. And because the Supreme Court's not going to throw it out, we're going to keep the Federal Reserve System, which actually does provide more assurances to the economy than when we were on gold or otherwise. Why? Because of massively wild swings in prices. You know, back in the day, you could have countries buy up lots of reserves of gold or dump lots of gold, causing swings. You don't get that with the Federal Reserve System. Most people don't care. We certainly have recessions. We certainly have swings in the economy, but not to the extent we used to have historically. So I see no reason to relitigate or to litigate gold currency versus fiat currency. Like, we've got this system. This is our system, and this is largely the global system. My caution to people who are committed to the system, however, is to pay attention to other countries in the world that are now trying to do their trading through gold as a way to get around the United States being the reserve currency. It is an assault on American power in the world, particularly our financial power in the world. And it is going to hurt us if they're successful. So you got to find a way to deal with it. And I personally think that imposing tariffs does cause more problems with the structure. All that being said, what let me just, for those of you who aren't aware of the situation, so we have, I think, 12 Federal Reserve banks, federal banks in the nation. This harkens back to the day of having a U.S. banking system and banks. And we've got a number of banks, and then the Federal Reserve is the central bank, and the Federal Reserve doesn't do monetary deposit and accounting for individuals. It does it for banks. And the member banks put members on the Federal Reserve Board. And it's a complicated process of Class A directors, Class B directors, Class C directors. You have the Federal Reserve Board of Governors are people appointed by the president. And they have 14-year terms. They can't repeat their terms. And those 14-year terms are designed to go through various administrations. They appoint directors to the boards of the Federal Reserve banks. And then the member banks appoint boards, some to represent the banks and some to represent the public. And then the Federal Reserve member banks get some seats on the Open Markets Committee that sets interest rates, along with presidential appointees. The presidential appointees get the majority of the appointments. The banks get the other appointments. Over time, the way it works is that the Federal Reserve Board of Governors can begin to exert more control over the Federal Reserve banks. But remember, the member banks, the banks in each region of the country, have independent voting power on the Federal Reserve Bank, so they can preserve some independence of the Fed. It's a very convoluted system, which is why I think, given the convoluted nature of the system and the checks and balances within the Federal Reserve, the Supreme Court will protect it. But in so protecting it, I also think that while the president's not going to get his way there, he's going to get his way with a lot of the other boards, a lot of the other independent commissions. As I said in the first hour, Amy Coney Barrett was asked in a conversation by Bari Weiss of the Free Press, soon to be of CBS News, about a federal constitutional crisis with the president. And Barrett, I think Justice Barrett rightly pointed out, there's really no constitutional crisis in the country right now. I want to go back to when Joe Biden was president and the Democrats controlled the Senate. There was a big push by Democrats to pack the Supreme Court. They wanted to get rid of the filibuster and add seats to the Supreme Court. You notice how they don't have that concern anymore. They've gone completely quiet on the idea of packing the Supreme Court. Why not? You would think if the Supreme Court was that bad And that out of touch, they would still support adding seats to the Supreme Court. And they don't want to add seats to the Supreme Court right now. Why? Because it was always partisan. And they leveraged their access to the press with ProPublica, CNN, NBC, New York Times, MSNBC, and the Washington Post to do hit jobs on conservative justices. They attacked Justice Thomas most of all, and then Sam Alito and his wife flying that flag. They've attacked Justice Barrett and family connections there. And they don't care to hold the left-wing members of the court to the same standard. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for the record, took more trips on other people's dime than any other member of the court, and they never assailed her for that fact. Sonia Sotomayor does it as well, and they don't go after her. They only go after the conservatives. It's just very wild that there was this massive need to add more seats to the Supreme Court, and the moment Donald Trump and the Republicans took over, suddenly nothing. Because the definition of a constitutional crisis in the United States today is a constitutional crisis is when Democrats don't get their way. That's a constitutional crisis in the United States of America. A constitutional crisis exists when Democrats do not get what Democrats want from the system. Donald Trump is getting much from the system, and Donald Trump is establishing precedents that will benefit the next Democrat. And the Supreme Court is giving Donald Trump those precedents in part because the Supreme Court of today realizes the Supreme Court of the past made some bad decisions. And one of the things the Supreme Court of the past did was undermine the power of the president as the executive branch. And this Supreme Court is staffed with 6 members who believe in reading plainly the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States says the executive power of the United States is vested in a President of the United States. The executive power is invested in a president, not a president and other entities, just a president, period. Therefore, when you have entities that operate within the executive branch, like the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Aviation Administration, the Federal Communications Commission, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, those are entities that are controlled by the President of the United States of America. Therefore, the President of the United States of America should, within the limits of legislation, get to control them. And if the president wants to fire a Democratic appointee to the board and that board can keep quorum, then the president can act. And if the president wants to fire members of the board such that it loses quorum and it has no power to act at all, the president should be allowed to do that. That's not a constitutional crisis. That's the structure of the Constitution. It's just done right now in a way that the Democrats don't like. Because why? Conservatives and Republicans and the populists and the Trump administration would prefer the government to do less. And if they want to neuter entities within the United States government that have regulatory power so those entities cannot operate, it's perfectly within their right under the Constitution. And that's not a constitutional crisis. That's the structure of the Constitution. If you don't like it, amend the Constitution. This isn't hard. Democrats scream about constitutional crises when the Republicans are doing things that the Democrats think only they should do. And if you want to understand the Trump administration, if you want to understand the operations of a lot of the right these days, you need to understand this. The right and the Trump administration are in many ways operating now in ways they believe the left has long operated. The left can deny they've operated in that way, but many of these people on the right and the Trump administration believe they have operated in those ways, and they are doing so accordingly. So, for example, take the murder in Charlotte, North Carolina. Many people on the right, myself included, are pointing out that if the roles were reversed, it was a white murderer and a black victim, the national media would cover this ad nauseum, because you and I both know the media is not covering it right now because it's a black murderer and a white victim. You may disagree with me, but you're wrong. You are objectively wrong. And my case in point is those shootings that happened on the same weekend, the mass shooting in Alabama that was at a birthday party where something like 16 people were shot, and it turned out to be a black family's birthday party. The shooters were black, the victims were black, and the media moved on quickly. And in New York, a white girl was shot by a white man because she turned around in his driveway and she was killed, and the media moved on quickly. But in Missouri, a young black boy was shot through the door by an 80-year-old white man, and the president of the United States himself got involved in that story, though the young black man thankfully lived. But that was the story of the nation. That was the national news story because it was a young black boy and an old white guy who shot him through the door, and it became a national news story. That story had no more relevance to the nation than the story of a Ukrainian refugee on a train in Charlotte, North Carolina, getting stabbed to death by a black man. But the one story in Missouri became a national story, and this one didn't. Why? The only thing you can conclude is it was race. And the right and the Trump administration are now using the same rules that the left used to shape stories, guide stories, build stories, cover stories, and execute powers in and out of government. It's just the nature of the beast. And those of you on the left who are horrified by it, well, then you should stop doing it. The right, the Trump administration, the populists, they're only doing what they believe you have already done. You paved the path for this. You can scream constitutional crisis all you want, but you made it if it is one, but it's not really one. Hello there. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the United States. You know, so we should go back to the Lisa Cook situation here real quick. My position on Lisa Cook was that we needed more than just an allegation to fire Lisa Cook, because if it was just the allegation could be dragged up that she committed mortgage fraud. If it was just the allegation, well, the left has done this with people like Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito, Amy Coney Barrett. You could see a Democrat getting into the White House, coming up with wild allegations against Republican appointees to the Federal Reserve and saying, it's an allegation, they got to go. Look at Lisa Cook. And I said, we got to have something more than an allegation. Well, we have that something more now. We have multiple media outlets have, in fact, confirmed that Lisa Cook did file primary residence mortgage applications in 2 locations within 2 weeks. You don't need a formal hearing. You don't even need a guilt. That's not the way the hiring process works. So here's where the left is now moving, that Lisa Cook can only be fired for cause. And that cause means on the job at the Federal Reserve. They are so desperate for Donald Trump not to be able to fill her seat that they're willing to have a discredited member on the Federal Reserve. Whatever happened to people being above reproach? That's the standard they set for Clarence Thomas. The left did. The left set that standard for Clarence Thomas, that even though there's no allegation that he was ever persuaded to side with his friend before the Supreme Court, who in fact had no cases before the Supreme Court, that it's the appearance of impropriety that mattered. It's the appearance of mortgage fraud that should matter with Lisa Cook. Whether the left likes it or not, she should go. The fact of the matter is, Joe Biden wanted to put diversity ahead of competence, so he put her on the Federal Reserve Board. And they could have realized, oh, this mortgage fraud thing is something. But here's the thing that really blows my mind. The members of the press who were saying, look, I mean, we got members of, what is it, Bill Pult or whatever, possibly did the same thing. Well, then prosecute them. The number of members of the press say, well, we can't prosecute all the people who do this sort of stuff. No, I think you can and probably should. I haven't done it. You haven't done it. Why should these rich people with multiple houses get away with it? Now, while all this happened, I mentioned the price of gold. You've seen it skyrocket. Swiss America wants to help you protect your hard-earned money and assets, and all you got to do is go to SwissAmerica.com/Eric today and get their Secret War on Cash report. It's completely free. You can also call or text my name, Eric, E-R-I-C-K, to 800-289-2646. The All-Out War on Cash includes digital forms of currency, and it's spreading, so get the Secret War on Cash report completely free. You just mentioned Eric, E-R-I-C-K, when you call or text 800-289-2646. That's 800-289-2646. Or go to SwissAmerica.com/Eric. SwissAmerica.com/ERICK. Swiss America can educate you about the Secret War on Cash. The report is completely free. SwissAmerica.com/Eric or 800-289-2646. Message and data rates may apply. When we come back, Gallup has a new survey out that people's faith in capitalism is collapsing, and actually about a third of the country now fully on board socialism. There are some relevant data points out there. I really want to talk about this issue. I got some strongly held opinions on this when we come back.